Say that the voting has been pretty steady all day. This is one of 1,000 polling places all around Crimea, and 1.5 million ballots have been printed, and as you can see, plenty of people turning out. It's a miserable day outside. It's raining, it's dark, it's grey, but it doesn't really matter whether it affects turnout or not. This is a vote without a minimum threshold of voter turnout, so it doesn't matter how many people show up. The vote is still going to count. Now, of course, that's the first step. If the vote goes as expected and the vote is to join the Russian Federation, with all of these ballots here in this ballot box among those being counted, well, if that vote does go the way everyone expected, it's really just the beginning, because the Russian Duma, the parliament, then has to consider request to join the Russian Federation. They're going to be doing that a little bit later this week. And as we've seen throughout this crisis, a week is a long time. Anything can happen between now and then. Outside, the voters happy to declare their choice. I'm 45 years old, says this woman, and I never felt Kiev is the capital of my motherland. For me, it was always Moscow. And this, Crimea, always belonged to Russia. I don't think the mess, this trouble, will end soon in Ukraine, so I think it'll be better with Russia. Ukraine was always Russian territory. Ukrainian citizenship was imposed on us, says this woman. And perhaps a marker of the fear of those who oppose this referendum, a Crimean Tatar comes to us, wants to speak but afraid to show his face. This Crimean government is not legitimate, he says. They took power at the point of a machine gun, and this referendum too is illegitimate. A lonely voice in a city stoked with emotion and nationalist fervour. Michael Holmes, CNN, Simferopol, Ukraine.
So if Crimea decides to join Russia, Moscow lawmakers say they'll vote on the issue Friday. Our Phil Black is in the Russian capital, and let's find out more about what is being said there. So, Phil, I guess the big question is, what happens after the Russian parliament meets Friday? What will they be discussing?
Well, it really does appear to be a fact in waiting, Amara, the eventual rubber stamp from Russia's parliament approving the results of the referendum and essentially inviting Crimea into the family, if you like, or welcoming them home, as many here would believe. We've had Crimean politicians in Moscow in recent weeks, and when they came here, they met with Russian parliamentarians and they said, we will absolutely respect the results of the referendum and we'll make sure that it happens within days. So although that's not President Putin speaking, it's still a very clear indication that the momentum, the events on the ground here in Moscow all point to a very likely outcome where Crimea is carved out of Ukraine and helps the Russian Federation get that little bit bigger. It is overwhelmingly popular here, not an absolute consensus among all Russians. Not everyone supports what is happening there, but President Putin's approval ratings are up around the 70% mark. And when you talk to people here, they usually subscribe to two possible schools of thought. One is the box of candy argument that says Crimea was always Russian before it was given away to Ukraine back in 1954, like a box of candy. And so they see this as very much correcting that mistake in history. And then there are others who buy into the Russian government narrative, which is the revolution in Kiev was illegal and there is now a threat from nationalists to ethnic Russians in the east and south of the country. That's what you hear a lot on Russian television. Here, that is what President Putin stands by. It is what he told the German Chancellor Angela Merkel when they spoke on the phone today. And it is why Russia says it still reserves the right to intervene militarily in the east of the country if it believes there is an ongoing threat to ethnic Russians in that region, Amara.
And Phil, is there a concern that more Russian troops may move into eastern Ukraine? On Saturday, we had those reports of pro-Russian troops in the Kherson region. Is that concern valid?
There's a lot of nervousness about this, and there are conflicting messages, I think, coming from Moscow. As I mentioned, they have maintained, they have the right and responsibility, Russia says, to protect what they say are Russian citizens or compatriots, that is, people who identify ethnically, culturally with Russia. They say they are getting requests of protection from these people and that those requests are being considered. That means that Russia still reserves the right to intervene militarily if they believe it is necessary to do so, if they believe it is in Russia's interest, perhaps to do so. President Putin has the permission of the Russian parliament to do it if and when he sees fit. But we heard from Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, towards the end of the week, saying that Russia has no plans whatsoever to invade. At the moment, there is real concern, I think, among analysts, among some significant European leaders, that this could just be the beginning. Crimea could perhaps be phase one. We remain to see precisely just to what extent Russia's ambitions in Ukraine involve potential further military intervention.
Moscow for us. Thank you for that. And if Russia moves to annex Crimea, as many believe it will, the repercussions could be seismic, not least for Ukraine. Ivan Watson joins us now live from the capital, Kiev. So, Ivan, what is the latest going on there?
Well, Amra, the fledgling Ukrainian government definitely under fire, not only with what it describes as the Russian military invasion of Crimea, this referendum vote, and the prospect that that chunk of territory will be broken off in the days ahead, but also growing calls for separation from Ukraine, coming from predominantly Russian-speaking, ethnic, Russian-populated cities in the east of Ukraine, as well as the buildup of Russian military forces along Ukraine's eastern border with Russia. So you had the Ukrainian Prime Minister issuing a stern warning to some of these people who are calling for rejoining Russia in eastern Ukrainian cities. Take a listen.
Тобто фактично незавершений розподіл.
Let there be no doubt that the Ukrainian state will find all ringleaders of separatism and division who now, shielded by the Russian troops, are attempting to destroy Ukrainian independence. We will find them all. If it takes a year, 2 years, we will bring them to court and we will try them at Ukrainian and international courts. The earth will burn beneath their feet.
Stern words there. The Prime Minister going on to say that an emergency fund is going to be generated of close to $1 billion to modernize and mobilize Ukraine's military. Meanwhile, the interim defense minister announcing that Ukrainian troops and military equipment are being moved to the south and east of Ukraine. We've seen these convoys of military vehicles on the move, heading basically to areas close to where the Russian military has been deployed thus far. So we're hearing about Ukraine basically preparing to perhaps try to defend itself. The Ukrainian acting foreign minister yesterday announced that Ukraine is basically fighting a diplomatic war against Russia. But as we see with military on the move, there are fears that it could turn into a much more serious conflict on the ground. In the meantime, here in Kiev, in Maidan Square, the scene of months of protests and fierce clashes, the people here, Amara, are still in mourning for more than 100 people who were killed here in clashes just last month. And the mood is still very somber, very grim, with this new threat in eastern and southern Ukraine, threat of potential carving up of Ukraine with calls for separatism. We've been talking to people on the ground here, and they've been sharing their thoughts about this referendum taking place in Crimea. Take a listen.
We can't be happy about what's happening in Crimea. And we want our politicians to do something. We want the international society actually tell Putin actually to get back, you know. And we don't want to war. We don't want to fight. We don't want any war.
This is a parallel between Hitler's actions in Sudetenland in 1938 and Putin's actions in Crimea in 2014.
So a lot of questions here, a lot of concerns, a lot of fear. Nearly everybody you talk to in the square here in Kiev, Amara, they tell me we don't want war, we want peace, but also increasingly people are starting to say we may have to defend our country, we may have to defend our land. Amara?
So in this scenario, if Kiev moves to defend Ukraine, what means does have, considering it has a much smaller military than Russia?
Well, it concedes, the government here concedes it's outgunned by the Russian military, it's outmanned by the Russian military, it's financially in a lot of trouble right now. One of the measures that the authorities here have taken is to just try to reach out to international institutions, to Western partners. You've got the interim foreign minister traveling to Brussels on Monday to meet with the NATO Secretary General. They're trying to reach out and get as much international support as possible in, again, as Ukraine's top diplomat described it, this diplomatic war with Moscow. Another measure that the Ukrainians are taking is to organize a new National Guard. And already I'm hearing from people that I've spoken to, people who faced off against the riot police here last month are starting to volunteer to join up with that National Guard, volunteering if there is a mobilization of Ukrainian men and women to defend Ukraine. They're already volunteering to train and to join whatever service is necessary for that. So that just gives you a sense of how worried people are right now, and that there is the possibility of conflict on the horizon, that people are starting to really realize that and worry about that, and Ukrainians are starting to volunteer for that if that scenario does unfold. Amara.
Yeah, a lot of concern there. Ivan Watson in Kiev for us. Many thanks to you. So if if the vote favors Crimea joining Russia, the impact is going to be far more than just the loss of land for Ukraine. Some believe there will be more than one loser if the final vote is yes.
For the Americans, it's a loss of credibility on the international stage, yet again drawing red lines that aren't stood up to. For the Russians, this is a country that's not doing well economically. They're taking on Crimea, which itself requires subsidies. There's the cost of the military cost. There has been a pickup in support for Putin himself within Russia. His popularity's probably gone up a good 10 to 15 points. But of course, the disposition of most Ukrainians has become vastly more anti-Russian, so that's a loss for them. The big loss, of course, is for the Ukrainian people who are watching their country get dismembered, who are unlikely to get the kind of support consistent and committed from the U.S. and Europe after this leaves the headlines, and who will lose their gas subsidies from Russia immediately. So the Ukrainian people are the real losers here.
All right, and that was Ian Bremmer, president of Eurasia Group. We want to go live now to a news conference being held by the head of the Crimean Electoral Commission, Mikhail Malyshev. Let's take a listen.
3,000 people have voted. I can tell you the figures in Sevastopol by 18. 255,725 people have voted in Sevastopol. 1,379,724 people have voted all over Crimea, including Sevastopol. Now, according to the cities, Alushta, 75%, Armyansk, 74.61%, Jankoy, 84.56%, Евпатория, Керчь, 88.22%, Красноперекопск, 80.48%.
So what you're listening to is the head of the Crimean Electoral Commission basically giving the numbers of data on the turnout so far, with about an hour and 15 minutes left in voting for this referendum. Crimeans are making a decision between joining Russia or effectively becoming an independent state. Of course, we will continue to watch the results of this referendum throughout the day today. All right, coming up on the iDesk, did the pilot of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 down his own plane? It sounds like an unlikely scenario, but it's happened before.